What's up, guys? Welcome to this month's Trade Secret. I'm Ed from Guitar Space. Let's get to it. For this month's Trade Secret, what I wanted to do was I wanted to capture David Gilmour's tone, but only using Logic effects. Now, I'll talk about that, my process, and we'll break down each of the guitars and what was used. I'll share my settings and all that, and also what I learned. But I'm sure you're eager to hear what happened, what it sounded like. Here it is. All right, now why did I get started going down this rabbit hole? Well, first, it's the 50th anniversary of the recording of Dark Side of the Moon. And that was a very influential recording in my development as a guitarist. Now, I do this Throwback Thursday ritual. This is where this all started from. So instead of doing the Throwback Thursday where you share an old photo of a bad haircut and the clothing trends of yesteryear, what I decided to do was I just pour myself a cup of coffee and put on my headphones, listen to Apple Music, because Apple Music uses the lossless technology, and I can hear the difference between that and like Spotify. And although I do have a Spotify family plan that to share with my family and my band members, and I share playlists going back and forth, I do enjoy the listening experience more on Apple Music. So I pour myself a cup of coffee, listen to the recording, and as I was doing this process, I started noticing, like, for example, Led Zeppelin 1. I love that album. I love the guitar playing on that album. The guitar sound, that Tele Supro sound that Page used on Led Zeppelin 1 doesn't compare to Led Zeppelin 2, where he's using the Les Paul and the Plexi. The other thing, I remember I got into, in the early 80s, I was into Judas Priest. And on Screaming for Vengeance, the guitars on that sound magnificent. The production on that. And these guys weren't really, they weren't stomp box lovers as far as I know. I think that those are just humbuckers and the amp tones. So as I started doing this, I ended up listening to Dark Side of the Moon and going, the textures on this are gorgeous. I'm not a modulation guy. I'm not a delay guy. But I'm listening to these things. I go, man, wouldn't it be fun to recreate that? And I tried doing that with my Headrush pedal board. And I was surprised as to how close I was able to get to it. And I said, all right, let me take the gloves off. Let me see if I could do this using just the plugins in Logic. Everyday stuff that most of us have at the ready. And I was surprised by the result. All right, very pleasantly surprised. And I want to share with you what the process was and how I got there. All right, now, before I actually get into the David Gilmour tone, I'm going to talk about tone in general. I've been on a tone quest seriously for the past year, and I created a playlist of my favorite guitar tones, which aren't necessarily my favorite guitar players. And what I discovered was, like, for example, the solo on Jackson Browne's Running on Empty is David Lindley. And love that tone. Rick Vito's guitar solo on Bob Seger's Like a Rock. I remember when I first heard that, I thought it was glorious. Robin Ford's Talk to Your Daughter. Larry Carlton, and when I saw Larry Carlton live, I was blown away by his tone. I could go on and on and on about this. There's certain players that I love the way they play. I love their note selection. And I love the way that, I love the way that they weave together those sounds. Then there's the sound, the physical production, the sound that the player produces. I love that too, but that's a separate thing. And I also love how certain players play. Maybe not crazy about their guitar tone, like when I mentioned Led Zeppelin 1. Love Page's guitar playing on there, but not crazy about the guitar tone on the album. In my Throwback Thursday thing, I was listening to a Michael Schenker and love the way he plays, not crazy about his guitar tone. But this is just my personal preferences, all right? But now let's talk about the David Gilmour tone. Now, he's arguably one of the most easily recognizable guitar players. And it seems like he takes a lot of thought and care into not only the notes that he chooses to play, but also how to play them and what they sound like, the end result for the listener. Now, behind David's sound, it's driven by high watt amps in the 70s. Now, he did this Dark Side of the Moon thing live again in 94. And 94, the rig was completely different. I did not see that tour, so I can't comment as to what the live sound was like. But I'm sure it's similar to what they did during that time period in Division Bell. Now, here's the thing. The secret behind it is Class A tone. Class A tubes are, they grab the full voltage of the, there's somebody who could probably explain this a lot better than I can. But the way I understand it is that the Class A tubes don't distort as well and they don't sag, but they give you a lot of clean, high headroom. So that's the cornerstone of his sound. Then in order to get the distorted sound, it comes from pedals. And he's got like some boutique tube drivers and stuff, but the Big Muff is also a big part of that sound. So I used a 3-knob fuzz to try to get that. Now, what I discovered was that the compressor comes before the fuzz, and the compressor tames the fuzz. One of the reasons why I never used compressors was why I never used fuzz pedals was because I couldn't tame them. That asymmetrical distortion, not a favorite of mine, but also a difficult sound to tame. And then I was always wondering how guys like Eric Johnson would get that violin type of tone and attribute it to the fuzz pedal. And then there's the David Gilmour tone. All right, so I needed to get that and then add the modulation effects. All right, so on the Headrush pedal, when I tried it, I tried a bunch of amps, and there was an orange amp clone that simulator that came closer. I didn't want to spend a lot of time on it because those of you who have done this exercise knows that this could be a black hole where you could just lose the whole day. So I went from there to start adding the pedals. Now I put the compressor first in the signal chain, then I added the fuzz, then going into an amp, and I used a transparent preamp in Logic, and I just used it as is with the 410 speaker cabinet simulator that it came with, and it mic'd it with a SM57 simulator or modeler, if you will. And that's what I use to set up the sounds. All right, so here was my goal. My goal was to get close. You're not going to be able to replicate these things exactly. I don't have Gilmour's hands. I don't have his melodic sensibility. All of that stuff is missing. But nonetheless, I wanted to create an inspired by David Gilmour tone that was close, and I feel that I got there. And my settings get me in the ballpark. Now, if I was to continue this from what you're about to hear, I would probably change the compressor to a more studio quality plugin, and the modulation effects. I think that's the part that's missing. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you think, how you think I did, what you think I missed. I shared this with some guitar playing friends, and some of them said that they would turn up the delay and the reverb, which is understandable because I tend to use those things sparingly. I also set the EQ on the preamp all at noon. That was what got me there. When I tweaked the presence up kind of high to give it a little bit of that air at the end of the sound. And now, as I said, I would have used probably changed the compressor and use more higher quality plugins, but I'm sure you guys prefer hearing it the way it is here. All right, so now let's break down each instrument one at a time, and then you'll hear it. All right, so for the lead guitar sound, the signal chain is the compressor to the fuzz, to the amp, to the delay, and finally to the reverb. For the compressor, I set the sustain at -25 dB, the level at 0 dB, and the attack slow. Next, for the fuzz is at 29.2. The level is at plus 2.5 dB, and the tone is at 0.5. For the amp, again, I used the Logic Transparent preamp with the black panel 4x10 cabinet and an SM57 mic sim. I didn't change anything here. The only thing that I did was I put the gain, bass, mids, and treble at noon, turned the reverb off, turned the effects off. The presence was at around 3 o'clock with the master at about 4 or 5 o'clock. The delay is set with the sync on, and I set the time to 16th notes. The repeats are at 93%, and the mix is at 25%. I also left the tone cut at off. Now for the reverb, I used the preset. I used the medium vintage spring preset, and the tone's at 0, the style's at vintage, and the mix is at 25%. The first rhythm guitar sound is really it's a Leslie sound, and I just played some open chords. The signal chain is a compressor to the amp, and I use the roto phase and reverb. That's it. All right, so all the settings are the same for the compressor and the amp and the reverb. So here it's really, I just used a preset on it, and it's this 8th note preset. It's called the 8th note roto, and the rate is at the 8th note, the sync is on, and the intensity is at 52. And I also use the modern setting. For the second rhythm guitar, this is the one with the delay. And again, I have the compressor, amp, delay, and reverb. That's the signal chain. So again, the compressor, the amp, and the reverb stay the same. The only thing that I changed was the delay. Now, I used the Blue Echo because it closely resembles the layout of a Boss delay, the Boss, the DD2, DD3, that's a great delay, and would work great in your pedal board if you wanted to emulate this sound. All right, again, the sync is on, and the delay time is set to the dotted 8th note. Repeats are at 30%, and the mix is at 33.5. The tone cuts off. Rhythm Guitar 3. This is the one with the phaser. And again, our single signal chain is compressor amp. And the phase tripper is what I used for the phaser sound, and then the reverb. Compressor amp and reverb settings stay the same. So for the phaser, I just used a preset. It got the job done, and I just played a little strum and part on it. You know, when you mix these all together, you got the end result. All right, guys, so my biggest takeaway here, this is what I learned from doing this. You know, my notes are important. You know, the content that I play is important, but how I play them is more important. And the thing is that the sound affects the way that I play them. So when I was coming up with the rhythm guitar parts, the sound was what inspired what I wanted to emulate. How I sound is crucial. Being able to produce a solid guitar sound, a really inviting guitar sound that is ear candy, is important. It's probably the most important of the three. The most important thing is, guys, save your money. Don't buy the next shiny new pedal just because it's the next shiny new pedal and you feel like your pedal is not working or your plugin is not working. Learn how to tweak. It takes time. It does. And this exercise certainly did take a lot of time. But what it did was I went back to my pedal port. That's why it's a mess behind me. I went back to my pedal port and started tweaking with what I learned, and I'm getting a lot closer to the tone, that magical tone that I hear in my head. All right? Thanks for watching, and like I always say, practice smart, play from the heart. Please subscribe if you like this content. Leave me a comment below. Let me know how things are going. Please be nice. Be cool, man. We all want to get better, and and if we can just spread some of the positivity and some of the joy that the instrument brings to us, rather than the negativity, the hostility, and the resentment, man. That stuff is poison. I'll see you next time.